This is Do It for a Living, your source for inside information on the future of automotive performance.
Interact with people. If you start paying attention, you start seeing that the same person keeps liking everything you post, or they've gone back in time and liked every picture you ever uploaded. Don't be passive. Reach out to that person and send them a DM and say, hey, thanks for interacting with our page and liking our stuff, and what's your name and what are you into? And there might be a customer there.
What's holding you back from starting or growing your business into what it can be? Well, if you're listening to this, it's not a lack of information. What you're about to hear is all you need to get motivated and start making waves. Do It for a Living podcast details the journey of today's true players in their own words. Find out how they broke out so you can too. The time is now. The time is always now.
Welcome back to another episode of Do It for a Living. I'm Todd Ersley with my Shop Assist, and today I've got with me Dan Kahn of Kahn Media. So you've probably heard their name many times on previous episodes, so I've been working with their kind of marketing team to introduce us to some people for the podcast, and so they've been coming up over and over and over again, and I finally got the opportunity to talk with Dan himself, and so really excited to have him on the podcast today. So Dan, how are you doing?
I'm really well, Todd. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm a fan.
You represent a lot of really cool companies in this aftermarket industry. And so before we get into, kind of the details of your business side, can you kind of give us a background about yourself? Where did you grow up? What did you do as a kid? Just kind of take us back up until the point of starting Kahn Media.
I consider myself very fortunate because I think that sort of fate kind of put me in a position where, I'm not sure a lot of people out there in the world can say that they just love going to work every day. And I can say that conclusively. I love my job. I love the industry that we work in. I'm a car guy through and through. So and I think there's been a sort of very series of fortunate events that have led me to the place where I'm at now. So I grew up in Southern California in LA. My grandfather was kind of a Depression era car guy. So he was a car guy, was in World War II, because he kind of grew up in the Great Depression. For him, the hot rod thing was a little bit weird and wasteful. He was more like stock restored Model A's and things like that. Yeah. But he was still a car guy. And my dad was very much the typical SoCal baby boomer car guy. He's the kind of guy, he's like American Graffiti, cruise night on, Van Nuys Boulevard, 1960s, had a lot of hot rods,
going to the car hop.
Exactly, the whole deal. So he had that very sort of typical SoCal car guy upbringing. My grandfather and my father were both small business owners. My dad still runs his company that he's run since 1961 as a contractor. So he was never in the car business. So for him, the car thing was just a hobby. It was like what he would do to blow off steam. And all the years growing up, I could remember, my dad had this project shop behind our house, and he would come home from work, have dinner with us, and then he would go out into the shop, and he had a CNC and a lathe and was a welder, and he was out there fabricating stuff and making stuff, and I would go hang out. So I very much kind of was indoctrinated into this whole thing very early with him. We restored my first car. I always loved Mustang Fastbacks, always wanted a Mustang Fastback. When I was 14, we found a pretty junky 68 Fastback. It had, it had been sort of like abandoned in someone's driveway for 20 years. So every panel was a different color and had some, rust, and it didn't run. And it was just an old car. And I bought it for like, I think it was like $1,200 or $1,300. And it took us 2 years. We totally disassembled it, and we did everything. So we built the motor, everything. We didn't rebuild the trans. It had a top loader 4-speed, and that was beyond us. But we built the motor. We did all the paint and body ourselves. We did the interior. We did all the wiring. So it was great. It was a really fun father-son project. It was a huge learning experience for me. Finished that car when I was 16. And honestly, I literally, this isn't hyperbole, I literally learned to read with car magazines. I'm kind of an ADD guy, and I wasn't interested in sort of the normal path, and I don't think I was probably the easiest kid to teach in elementary school and all that. But I loved cars, so my mom and dad would buy me, issues of Hot Rod and Mustang Monthly and CarCraft, and I loved CarCraft as a kid because I don't know if you or your listeners remember this, but in the early '90s, before the .com thing, everybody, if you wanted content, you had to give, especially car content, it came from a magazine, and everything was very kind of stiff and formal, and CarCraft was not like that. CarCraft had this kind of real attitude where they were out, and this is kind of right before the whole David Freiberger thing, which he took this to even the next level with kind of all the junkyard builds and all that. But back then, they had attitude. They wrote about street racing. No one else was talking about that. So I really loved car magazines, and so to me, when I finished my Mustang, which I thought was a nice car. I mean, in retrospect, it was a nice car, but it wasn't maybe as totally awesome as I thought it was.
Not magazine cover nice, huh?
right. So I didn't understand that, and I thought I need to. I want to have my car in a magazine. So, and I didn't know how to do that. So I literally went to a local park, pulled it out into the middle of the grass. My cousin had an SLR camera. I didn't really even know what that was. I borrowed his camera. We started taking a bunch of pictures. I've now since found those photos, and there's like a light pole coming out of the roof.
Not framed very well.
No, but I didn't know. This was on film, by the way. So this would have been like 94. Shot a bunch of pictures, wrote up an article where I basically kind of just copied what I saw in the magazines, that format, wrote a story, and started sending it to every magazine I could find an address for, and said, hey, feature this. And as it worked out, that sort of set me down my path because, first of all, I didn't know it at the time, but I was doing PR. I didn't even know what that word meant.
Yeah.
But that's what I was doing. And so I got some responses. So the first response I got, which is crazy now in retrospect, but at the time it was like, yeah, of course they're going to respond, was Hot Rod Magazine. And Ro McGonigal reached out to me, who was the editor at the time, and said, hey, I like your car. We're doing an issue on readers' rides.
Yeah.
And we want to put yours on the cover. And I was like, cool.
Well,
cover Hot Rod Magazine.
That's pretty wild.
Really, all you have to do is write a letter and you can be on the cover of Hot Rod. Again, I had no idea how sort of like, whether you want to call it fate or being blessed or whatever, but like it just sort of worked out. I lived in LA. They were based in LA. They, Randy Lorenzen shot it. It was a really cool experience, and it was me, and then they had like a middle-aged guy with a '61 Chevy, and then like an older gentleman in his late 70s in I think it was like a T-Bucket or a Model T, and so it was trying to represent kind of like the three generations of hot rodding, and I was in the back, so you could only see like a corner of the car, and I was standing there, but I'm on the cover of Hot Rod. So I thought, I'm just going to keep doing this. So I kept writing letters and ended up the cover of Hot Rod. It was on the cover of Mustang and Fords. It was on the cover of a now defunct magazine called Mustang Illustrated, all in a couple of month period. And I got a response from a couple of guys that worked at CarCraft. And they basically said, look, we are going to use a picture of your car in the magazine. And in the letter I wrote them, I had said, like, I love your magazine so much, and I want to do what you do. Here are pictures of my car. Here's a write-up of my car. Please feature my car and tell me how I do what you do for a living. And what they did for me changed my life because it was a guy named John Kiewicz, who unfortunately is no longer with us, and a guy named Miles Cook, who is. And they were the young guy editors at CarCraft on staff at the time. I think they were both probably in their mid-20s. Keep in mind, I was 16, so to me they were old.
Yeah, yeah.
And they called me and they said, hey, we're down on, Wilshire Boulevard in LA. Why don't you drive your car down? We'll check it out and see if it's feature worthy, and we'll take you out to lunch. Huh. And that was like God reaching out to me and talking to me. I was like completely floored by that. And I said yes. I had never, that was, and I don't know how familiar you are with LA geography, but I lived in the valley and they were in the city. And so I was out in the suburbs. I had never been in the city before, except for maybe like when my parents was a kid. So I might as well have been asked to drive to Pennsylvania. I had no idea, how to do that or where to go, but I figured it out. Drove down there and they took me to lunch. And they liked the car. They didn't feature the car, but they liked it. and we're at lunch, and these two guys kind of had the exact job I wanted said, and I'll never forget it for the rest of my life, they said, you should definitely not do this for a living.
Really? They were like, this is not a good idea.
Right. Like, this is a terrible plan. You seem like a nice kid. You should go to college and you should go be an accountant, or go get some regular job
for somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah. Go get a regular job. And I said, no. Like, you kids get to write about cars all day. I want to do that. That's awesome. How do I do that? And like, look, you're going to work your butt off. You're going to make barely a living wage. You're never going to have a free weekend for the rest of your life. You're going to, be completely, totally dependent on editors that may or may not, as every time an editor changes, you may not be able to keep your job. They're like, there's total instability. It's just a terrible way to make a living. You should definitely not do this. And I didn't hear any of that. What I heard was, this is awesome. You should do it.
So they, you met with them and you were all excited and they essentially told you this is not a good idea. And you were like, no, I'm going to do it. I don't care. Whatever you guys say, I'm not going to pay attention to you. So what was the next step, the next progression of your activities to kind of get started with the business?
Well, so after those editors kind of told me don't do this, and I said, okay, it's a great idea to do this. I just started I started taking journalism classes. I mean, I was a sophomore in high school at that point, so I started taking journalism classes. I worked my way up to being the editor of the school paper. Tried to teach myself photography. Again, this is before, I think, I knew one person at that time with a digital camera, and the technology wasn't at the point yet where you could even, you couldn't
couldn't use them. Yeah,
they weren't usable. So I think I had like a Nikon FE, which is like a totally manual film camera, which, by the way, I wish I still had, because now in retrospect, that was a pretty cool camera.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, the nostalgia is coming back.
Exactly. And I was shooting on Tri-X black and white film and got a little lab in my parents' spare bathroom and started developing my own film and started shooting on chrome film, and honestly was a terrible photographer and needed a lot of help, but didn't know that. And really just started started building up my own portfolio. And so another benefit that, again, at the time I didn't realize was going to really help my future career, but it just seemed like a fun job, and now in retrospect helped me tremendously, was early in high school, I was working at like the mall, normal kind of retail job, and hating it.
Yeah.
And again, because I had this cool Mustang that I built, and it was had become sort of a calling card, and I went to the drag races a lot and went to local cruise nights. I got to know other car people, and there was a company at the time called PAW, Performance Automotive Warehouse. I'm not sure if they're even still in business anymore, because Summit and then Amazon and all these kind of catalog companies, and then the e-commerce really kind of put them out of business. But at the time, they were a kind of a mega store for hot rod parts and performance parts. And they had some retail stores, and they had a big warehouse. And they had these, and anyone who read magazines in the 80s and 90s, they used to buy like these 10-page black and white spreads that were mini catalogs in all of the different car mags. And they had a store 10 minutes from my parents' house. So I went down there, applied, got a job, and I was working the counter selling speed parts. And I had that job for 3 years, and it was really a tremendous learning experience for me, because I knew a little bit about Ford muscle cars. But by the time I left there, because I was working the counter, working the catalog, I could give you, for a while, and I probably could still if I really concentrated, but I could rattle off the part number of every Edelbrock intake manifold.
Yeah.
Of every hooker and Headman header set. I knew the part numbers, the fitment.
Wow.
So it was great training. I didn't know I was getting this like amazing kind of onboarding experience. I thought I was just earning $5 an hour and happy I could buy parts on layaway, but it was actually great training for me. And I really learned a lot about the aftermarket, and also learned a lot about kind of quality manufacturing and R&D. And I knew which parts kind of got returned a lot because which ones didn't, and which ones were easy to install and which ones had a lot of fitment problems. And so it was really actually a great sort of learning experience. And then right after I graduated from high school, I decided to go to community college for a year or two before I transferred. And funnily enough, my parents' neighbor directly across the street from them was a guy named Chris Hatunian, and he's still around. He's a really talented photographer. And Chris, at that time, had been the editor of Mountain Bike Magazine for a long time. He'd been there like 18, 19 years, and he worked for this little publishing company that was in the valley, not too far from my parents' house, that was primarily like hobby and enthusiast small niche magazines.
Okay.
So they were mostly like bike industry, mountain bike, road bike. They had stuff on toys. They had a magazine for people who were like, they had a lot of like military magazines. So they had one that was on airplanes, like, but like not like
very specific small market stuff.
It was, it was like World War II aircraft, and they had a magazine that was literally about like naval ships, and there was like a whole magazine.
Oh
I think
my gosh.
it was like really into naval ships. They've got a magazine for you, so it's really niche stuff. But they had a couple car books. They had one at the time called Rod Action, which was kind of a street rod magazine, and they had another one called All American Chevys, which, as you would guess, was about Chevys. And then they had another one that was Car Toy Collectibles. That was car toys, and then they had one called Kart Racer, which was all kind of, and that was when the shifter kart thing was just exploding. And Chris kind of walked over to my parents' house and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, we've got a couple of these car magazines, and they're looking for a writer, and I know you like to write, and I know you're into cars. Would you consider applying?" And I said, "Oh my God, yeah, absolutely."
Yeah.
So I went in, I applied. It was at this kind of seedy office at this, and I found out after the fact that I guess in like the 70s and 80s, they were in the adult content business.
Okay.
And then they kind of like, I guess they got into some trouble with that. So they pivoted to this enthusiast model.
Okay.
A lot of the back end people, like in production and graphic design and all that, were like holdovers from the old stuff. So it was a really sort of a pirate ship full of interesting characters that worked there, and so it was a huge learning experience for me. But I went in and suddenly I was on salary for the first time in my life. I wasn't making like minimum wage hourly. I was making, at the time, I thought huge money. I think they paid me like $25,000 a year. Yeah. And I was thinking like, oh my God, I have so much money. How am I going to spend it all? And literally I went in and I was writing for the Chevy magazine and the Street Rod magazine, and Ron Ceradano, who's a long-time technical contributor and editor for Street Rodder. He was involved in one of those magazines at the time. Tex Smith, who's sort of this like legendary automotive writer, was at sort of the tail end of his career. He was writing for some of those magazines. A guy named Kevin Bowles, who's no longer with us, that was sort of a long-time Carcraft and Peterson guy. He was there. And unfortunately, that publishing company had a reputation for kind of hosing its writers. And that was bad for them. And that was an unfortunate situation that they were not very ethical in how they did business. But it was great for me because they had all these kind of legendary people that were kind of coming and going that kind of took pity on the young guy who didn't know anything, and I asked a lot of questions. And so I learned from all these guys. And then as that company would kind of screw them, they would kind of quit and get pissed off and leave. And then every time that happened, I would sort of move up the food chain.
Yeah, you move up, yeah.
Yeah. So I was literally, by the time
Attrition,
I was 19, I'm 19 years old, and suddenly I'm the editor of 2 national magazines.
Wow.
And they were small, and they were hard to find on the newsstand.
But you were still the position, yeah.
So I was building project cars and writing a lot of editorial, and I went to SEMA for the first time as an editor at 19.
So were you still going to community college at that point, or did you get out of that?
Was. No, so it was really my parents thankfully are pretty smart people, and I'm like, I don't need to go to college. Look at this, making money. Great, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, no, you don't be an idiot. You absolutely need to get a degree because this whole thing seems pretty shaky, and you need to have a backup plan. So I actually was going to school full time and working full time, and trying to juggle all that. And I managed to pull it off for a couple of years, and then was ready to transfer to a regular university. And I think at that point I kind of realized, hey, I'm not sure I can keep going at this pace. And so I made a deal with those guys where I basically said, look, I'll still work remote and I'll contribute, I can do whatever it was, write about 2/3 of the content.
Yeah, just on a lesser extent, huh?
Yeah, and I wasn't going into the office every day, and they were going to bring in someone to be kind of a managing editor to run the magazine, and I would write all the content. And I had been warned that, hey, the way these guys operate, eventually you're going to get burned. And so the way the deal we had worked out was my dad, because this is, again, still kind of an analog era. So I would put all the articles on a floppy disk, and then I would print out the articles as well as a blue line. And then the photos were still, chromes, they were slides. So I'd put together these story bags, I'd bundle them all up into all the content, and I would mail it to my dad from school, because at that point I was down in San Diego getting a journalism degree. And so I would mail them to my dad, and he would physically walk in all the story bags, and they would hand him a check, and he would hand them the content. And that way, that was my way of trying to keep myself from getting
not getting paid.
Exactly. And that worked out pretty well for, I think, about a semester or two. And then the very first time he walked in there with a story bag and they didn't have a check, I said, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
And so I wound that deal up, and actually was very fortunate that I was able to work for a tech magazine down in San Diego right away. So I got another writing job for a magazine that doesn't exist anymore. But this was when this would have been like probably about 2000. Yeah.
So it's probably, I mean, it wasn't necessarily easy, but it was easier to get another job. You know, in college, when you're like on your resume, it says like senior editor for this and this magazine. Like it makes things easier.
Absolutely. And so this is around 2000. So the .com thing was just cranking at that point. And there was a startup tech magazine that it was actually founded by a bunch of former San Diego Business Journal reporters. And that was when Qualcomm was like a new company, and Bluetooth was this. I remember writing an article about Bluetooth, and everyone's like, that's a weird name. That technology is not going to last. And so that was great because it gave me some experience outside of automotive. I did that for a while. At the same time I was doing that and getting a degree, I actually did an internship for Weider, which now is now owned by American Media, but they owned like Shape, Muscle and Fitness, Men's Fitness. And that internship was also great because it gave me some really mainstream writing experience. It exposed me to a much bigger industry than the automotive thing. So I did that kind of stuff as I wrapped up. And then I was very fortunate that through a mutual friend, I met a woman that I give a lot of credit for my whole career, named DeEtte Crow. And I was a senior in college, and I was wrapping up my degree, and I met DeEtte, and she was a publisher at Peterson Publishing in charge of Rod and Custom magazine. And DeEtte is this amazing person. And if you ever see like those racing harnesses that say Crow on them, that's her family's business that was started by her husband, Fred, and that she helps run. But at the time, Fred was running Simpson Racing, which was, fire suits and harnesses and parachutes and all that. And DeEtte was a longtime Peterson employee, worked her way up, and I think she might have been the first female publisher of a magazine in that company.
Oh, cool.
And so, I mean, if you think about it, like in the 70s and 80s, that was a big deal. And she then was the one who was responsible for bringing back Rod and Custom, because, that was kind of their street rod magazine back in the 50s. I think it started in 53. And then that magazine was shuttered for a long time. And then she brought it back to life with Pat Ganal. And she had been the publisher since the beginning of the thing, since they restarted it. And she reached out, and we met a couple times. And so she hired me so that when I graduated with my journalism degree, I had a job waiting at Peterson Publishing, which, that was my dream.
Yeah.
So I had sort of like,
all of the things you had done up until then were like falling into place, sounds like.
Exactly. And it was great. So I graduated, I moved to LA and got an apartment, in the city. And for a very short window of time, I had this experience where, Rod and Custom at that time was at 6420 Wilshire, which was the big Peterson building down the street from the museum. We were on the 11th floor with Hot Rod and Carcraft and Gray Baskerville, who was like literally a living legend to me. And I worshiped the guy, long time editor of that magazine. His office was like, I was in a cube, but his office was right down the hall, and Freiberger's there. And all these people that I had read about are in the same floor as me. And it was so cool. And it was this amazing experience. And a photographer named Rick Amato took me under his wing and really taught me how to improve my photography. And I learned about production, and I learned about copy flow. And I had this great experience for a few months. And then Primedia came in and bought the company.
Okay.
And the first thing they did was they moved a bunch of stuff around, and they took Rod and Custom and said, okay, we're moving you guys to Orange County. We're going to put you in this other building down by Angel Stadium. And you're reporting to the guys that run Street Rodder. And they kind of mixed everything up, and they let our editor go and put a new editor in place. And so now suddenly I've got this, like, I used to have a 2-minute commute, and now I've got a 2.5-hour commute.
Oh, yikes.
And I did that for a couple more years, and I made it work, and it was fine. But sort of the bloom was off the rose.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. And they were great people, and it was an amazing experience, and I really enjoyed it. But I think kind of that commute was soul crushing, and there was so much corporate turmoil, and I wasn't articulate enough to explain it when I left. But the reason that I left was I had this idea in my head of what that job was going to be, and it was that for a little bit, and then it suddenly wasn't.
It changed, yeah.
Yeah, and so it was hard for me. And at the same time, that's when the .com thing was really cranking, and I knew I needed that experience, because at that time, Peterson, which became Prime Media, had a pretty backwards digital model, and even today, they're still kind of playing catch up now that they're called 10 or the Motor Trend Group or whatever. And there's a lot of really talented people there that I like a lot, but they had to play a lot of catch up on the digital side. And I understood that as a young guy, I kind of knew where that whole thing was going, and that, I'll never forget for the rest of my life, I was in a meeting, and it was like an all hands meeting, and some muckety muck that was way up the food chain from me came in and said, "Hey guys, we have this new thing we're going to talk about. It's called blogging." Yeah. There's this thing called blogs. And I remember at the time thinking, that's a weird word.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not 60. I'm not that old, but it wasn't that long ago. And I remember when Autoblog launched, everyone's like, that's a weird name for a website. That's not going to work. And obviously it did.
It did, yep.
So I started aggressively trying to find a new place to go, and ended up leaving Rod and Custom and going to Edmunds. I was there for the launch of their enthusiast channel, Inside Line. I got to do some really cool stuff. I got to go on a lot of long lead events and press drives, and really have a great understanding of not only how digital publishing works, but it allowed me to see how OEMs do ride and drive events and how they do PR, and exposed me to some super talented PR people on the corporate side and on the OEM side. And I did a lot of spokesperson stuff where they had me do some remotes on TV a few times. And it was a great experience. And I did that for a couple of years. And then they started kind of going away from Inside Line and the kind of traditional car review model. And I started feeling like, okay, I just still hadn't felt like I found my fit yet. And I had just bought a house, and I did something that now I could never do. But at the time, I was still young, and I wasn't married, and I didn't have kids. And so I quit my job without a backup plan.
Okay, yeah.
And I said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. And the .com thing was a grind. I was working crazy hours for not a lot of money, and they just, they just grinding away. And I just kind of realized I need to do something, because I don't want to keep doing this. So I quit. It was literally a few months after I closed escrow on my first house. I had a mortgage, and I'm going, okay, now I got to do something. And a friend of mine who was a long, long time, one of my best friends, who had also worked with me at Peterson, he was on staff at Super Chevy when I was at Rod and Custom. He had ended up working for a small boutique PR agency that mostly did motorsports and aftermarket brands. Okay. And he called me up and said, hey, we've got this little agency here that I work for, and we've got some cool clients, and we need someone, and we know you're a good writer, and do you want to come in and interview? And they had this little tiny office in Moore Park, California, which is this little tiny town north of LA. And I thought, okay, I'll check it out. And so I went up and I interviewed, and it was like a 5-man shop, and interviewed with them, got along really well. The owners, the company's called Auto Media 2000. It's no longer exists, but Leonard Emmanuelson and Jim McGowan, the two partners who ran it, they're still around. Lenny was a publisher of Motor Trend, and he was an editor at Hot Rod. Jim was an art director at a couple of the big Argus publications like Super Chevy. They're the nicest guys, and they're super bright and kind people. And they hired me kind of just like, hey, this guy's never done PR before, but let's just hire him. And they took me under their wing and really taught me the business. And I suddenly realized, wow, I really like this, because I can write, and I can be creative, and I can kind of roll up my sleeves and get involved with, the automotive aftermarket.
Yeah, you're kind of looking at it from a different viewpoint.
Exactly. It's all the creative stuff I like, but there's a lot more latitude. Yeah. Where when you're writing for a magazine or a website, when you're a road test editor at a website,
it's a pretty similar thing every time.
It's every time. You're writing the same story every time, and you can't really trash a car if you don't like it, because that client, that OEM, you have to have that relationship, and you want to get press cars some more.
You want to get the cool car that they come out with next to
exactly,
review.
Exactly. And if you love the car, you can't be too effusive, because people are going to say you're shilling for the company. So you're pretty much writing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And the same, and when I went and kind of changed hats and went over to PR, it was great because one day I'm writing ad copy and working with a graphic designer to build an ad, and the next day I'm writing some blog content, and the day after that I'm working on something else and writing a press release, and you're going out to an event and you're working with a bunch of photographers to shoot stuff.
Cool.
And so it was a much more kind of hands-on experience, and I loved it. And I did that a couple years, and a headhunter called, and just to be clear, I was the happiest I've probably ever been in my life at that job. They took good care of us. They were nice people.
Were you was this like mid-20s then?
This was mid-20s.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I was 25, happy as could be.
Yeah.
Making a decent salary. I didn't have to worry about paying. I mean, I wasn't getting rich, but I didn't have to struggle to pay my bills.
Yeah.
And I liked the guys I worked with. They were all really fun guys. We'd go have beer after work and just hang out. And it was fun. And my bosses were cool. So I was about as happy as I could be. And I got a call one day from a headhunter, and I didn't even really know what a headhunter was.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're not in finance, you don't hear that very much.
No, and it was some random stranger lady that I'd never talked to before. Who was asking me all these weird questions about what I do for a living. And what it turned out was she had been engaged by another PR agency that worked with, bigger brands. So I was working with little performance boutique, speed parts companies that made lifters and valve train components and stuff like that. And she was calling from a company that handles, OEMs and giant multinational automotive aftermarket and OEM brands. And she called and said, hey, we're looking, I'm helping this company and they're looking for a PR manager and blah, blah, blah. And so I took the call and we started talking, and then she started throwing numbers at me, and they were big numbers.
They were big numbers.
they were literally double my salary.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's hard to pass up.
And man, that's hard to not take that meeting. And I got to tell you, and so I went out there and I didn't feel great about it, but I met with the owner, and they had a really impressive client list, and I was honest with them and said, look, I like where I'm at and I'm happy where I am, and I'm not sure that I really want to move. And that wasn't a negotiating.
You were just telling them.
I was just saying I am happy, and they kept upping the number until and at that point I was either very serious with my at the time girlfriend, or we might have even gotten engaged at that point. I can't remember. I think it was right around the time we got engaged. And so I was talking, and I think my now wife had moved in, and so we're talking about it. And it was one of those things where it's okay, I'm young enough that this might be a dumb decision or it might be a good decision, but I need to at least try it.
Yeah, you could bounce back if it was bad.
Yeah, and if it worst case scenario, maybe it doesn't work out. And my bosses at Auto Media were cool about it. They kind of warned me. They're like, this might not be a great decision. This place you're going doesn't seem super warm and cuddly, but we understand why you're doing it. So they were real gentlemen about it and the way they handled it. And so I went to this other agency, and admittedly, I got great experience. It was one of those things where it was the hardest job I've ever had. My boss was not a super warm and caring guy, and so the work environment was kind of dog eat dog, but it did push me, and I learned a lot. And it was one of those things where I really dug in, and I said, I'm gonna make this work. I want to kick butt. And as I pushed myself, I also really, at that point, that's when social media, so this was around 06, maybe early 07, and social media had really started to explode. And up until that point, there was MySpace, which had started to kind of go away at that point. Facebook was around, but it was still kind of a college kid thing. And I started realizing, wow, there's an opportunity here. Because one of the things I'd been worried about for years was the PR business, especially automotive PR. Up till that point, 90% of it was writing press releases, sending them to print magazines, pitching them to print magazines, and getting stories in print magazines. And I'm looking at that landscape at that point, and I'm watching it start to contract. Mm-hmm. And, Peterson sold to K3, which sold to Primedia, which sold to Source Interlink.
They're all every time consolidating and.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Originally, there was McMullen, and there was Argus, and there was Peterson, and there's 5 or 6 different publishing companies, and each one had 7 or 8 or 9 different competing magazines, or in the case of Peterson, 20 or 30. And as they keep consolidating, they keep cutting redundant titles, and they keep firing staff, and they keep shrinking. And that vertical channel keeps growing. And it occurred to me that I have the lake I'm fishing in keeps getting smaller.
Yeah.
And eventually I'm going to be standing in a puddle. And so what's next? How do we have that conversation on behalf of the brand that we represent with a consumer if we don't have that filter of the media to have it for us? And it occurred to me that, hey, social media is a great way to do that. So I kind of had befriended a guy who was really pushing hard at that time. He had just sold his own agency and was kind of this like social media evangelist named Brian Solis. And he had written a book called PR 2.0 that I kind of became like obsessed with. And that was right as that. I don't think Web 2.0 was even a phrase yet.
No, that's actually pretty recent. It'd probably be funny to go back and read that book now.
It would, and I kind of want to do that. But the whole concept of his book now is like a no-duh kind of common sense thing. But at the time, it was revolutionary. And his whole point was, as a PR person, the next wave of this job is not going to be writing and sending press releases to print media and maybe to some degree digital or
it's gonna be
TV
this
media.
new like social media thing, which didn't exist.
Engagement. You're having communication directly with the consumer on behalf of your client.
Yeah.
And so I did all this research every night till 2 a.m. for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I ended up writing this like 75 or 80 page white paper. And it was basically a business plan.
Yep.
And it was about, this is how we're going to pivot the entire agency. We're going to change our business model. We're going to do it gradually. This is not just the theory behind it and cited sources and all the research, but I even had kind of the model and the business plan of, here's how many hours we need to dedicate every week to staff training. Here's how the onboarding is going to, here's how we're going to pivot the client so they buy into it. Here's how we charge for it. And I wrote this whole thing. And at the time, my wife and I had just started an MBA program.
Okay.
And so I had all this kind of stuff going on. And I took it to the owner of the agency.
You pitched it to them, and what did they say?
I did. I walked in, I sat down, I said, okay, I've
super
got this
confident.
And there's this like the thud moment, where you slam the book down on the desk and it's like 80 pages and spiral bound and a thunk and it hits the desk. I said, this is the future, and I was so excited. And he looked at it and said, okay, I'll read it, and totally didn't care. And
yeah,
I'm like,
no, didn't matter.
Yeah, like, oh my God, he's going to read it and it's going to blow his mind. And a couple of days later, he calls me into his office and, okay, well, I read it. And I still, to this day, I'm not sure that he actually did. And he said, okay, I'll give you, 2 hours a week of staff development time to test this. And I said, okay. And I think we got through one. And another senior manager in the company complained to him, to the owner.
That was nixed then, huh?
Yep, and said, this whole thing's a waste of time. This is stupid. And then done. It was shut down. Okay, this whole thing's a waste of time. We're not going to do it anymore. And I was crestfallen, and you have to understand, and one thing to point out, so at the same time, my wife and I are going to night classes to get MBAs at Cal Lutheran University. And her job, she worked in aerospace for this giant, huge multinational corporation that was paying 100% of her way for her master's degree. Mm-hmm. They paid for her books. They paid for everything. I was paying my own way. And it's at a private university, and it was expensive. Yeah. So I've got, 15 grand in bills sitting on my desk at home for the first semester in books. And I'm going to these classes, listening to these teachers, and I'm asking the teachers questions. And none of these people have ever been in business, and none of them were entrepreneurs. They were all academics.
Yeah, they're just teaching the material.
So I'm literally sitting in these classes thinking, oh my God, I'm going into so much debt, paying these people to teach me stuff that they themselves got out of a book.
Yeah. And they're probably way behind when there's a paradigm shift that fast, it's hard for them to keep up with it.
Absolutely. They were giving business case examples from the 80s. Yeah. And this is in like 2008. Yeah. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, I don't know, this whole thing doesn't feel right. And that book that white paper I wrote kept gnawing at me. And I woke up one day and I said, you know what? What if I just said, screw it? And I quit my job. I quit the MBA program. I just take this thing that I wrote at night every night for a month and use that as my North Star. And I start my own thing. And I have a very cool and compassionate and understanding wife. And we had only been married a few months at that point. She had a good job, making a decent salary. We had a little bit of money in the savings account. So she said, yeah, you know what? Do it. And best case scenario, works. Awesome. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work. I'll make sure the mortgage gets paid, and we'll give it a year.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not making any money in a year,
you can just go back into marketing and advertising.
Yeah, I'll go get another job, and we'll call that a failed experiment. And so that's what I did. So I gave my notice. That was in I did it the day we got back from the SEMA show in November of 2008. Started Kahn Media December 1st of 2008. So we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary, and the rest is history.
That's awesome. Well, before we get into the details about the business, this will be a good time. We'll just take a quick break here, and then we'll be right back.
We all know owning a shop is difficult, so we created My Shop Assist to help you manage the various jobs. Whether you run a machine shop, a performance tuning shop, build off-road trucks, or even do powder coating, My Shop Assist can help you. It is completely online and will help you schedule the jobs, log time on each task, track parts orders, and take pictures of the work. You can even export your jobs from My Shop Assist into QuickBooks as invoices. So if you're interested to improve operations at your shop, check out myshopassist.com to start your 30-day free trial.
So I'm back with Dan Kahn of Kahn Media, and tell us about Kahn Media when you got it started. Were you working, was it like out of your house? How did you get clients? To me, it sounds like you were having to, you're going to have to convince people. You couldn't convince the company to do it, so you wanted to do it yourself. So how did you convince clients to kind of go down this path? So yeah, just kind of give us like the ramp up of the business in the early days.
You bet. So I was very fortunate. So I made myself a promise when I started my firm that I wouldn't poach people or clients. I felt like, I know lots of stories about, people who left an agency and stole a bunch of business.
Took all the people. Well, that's the easy thing to do because you already have personal relationships with them.
Yeah, I didn't want to do that.
Okay.
I felt like morally and ethically,
moral code was higher than that.
Yeah, and I just felt like I wanted to be able to sleep at night. That said, I also kind of felt like I'm not going to, if someone comes knocking on my door, I'm not going to obviously turn them away.
No. Yeah,
I don't want to, I gotta eat, right? So I left. I started my own thing, and literally we had a spare bedroom in our house. And to be kind of gross and totally honest, that first 3 weeks, I'm pretty sure I didn't put on normal clothes. Like I spent pretty much 2 or 3 weeks in my bathrobe in the spare bedroom. I coded my own website. I didn't know how to do that, but I couldn't afford to hire a designer. Mm-hmm. So I just taught myself. I literally bought, I think, HTML for Dummies, and just I built my own site. I designed my own logo. The first few weeks, I wrote my own pitch materials. I wrote a real business plan. I tried to get everything in line. I designed my own business cards. I did everything to try and make it seem like I was as put together and professional as possible before I started doing new biz dev. And I really wanted to kind of, my goal was if I could have a client signed up before the end of the year, and I started again about December 1st, I thought, okay, that's the goal. Is if I could just have positive cash flow starting January 1, great. So that's what I did. And so I built the site. I came up with the name, which is not exactly all that creative. Kahn Media, it's my last name, whatever.
Yes.
I did our first logo. I did the business cards. And then at the prior agency, I had a client for a while that was Hotchkiss Suspension. And if you're into the muscle car thing at all, Hotchkiss is around for a long time, 25 years. And John... John was a former client at the last place, and he had left about 6 months before I quit for a variety of reasons. It wasn't a good fit with that agency. I think he was a little too niche and they were a little too broad. But I had a good working relationship with John and his GM, Henry. And and honestly, what I did is I sent notes out to different friends in the industry just to say, hey, I left my job. I started this new thing. If you know anyone looking for help, I would love to help them out with anything marketing or PR related. Let me know. Mm-hmm. And John called me up and said, hey, let's have lunch. So I went out there and had lunch with John and kind of told him my plan and how we were really going to try and lean into the whole social media thing. And I had all these ideas and I kind of showed him all the stuff I had written and all the things that I had kind of been percolating in my brain for 6 months. And he loved it. And so he signed up, and Hotchkiss Suspension was our first client. And then very quickly, within a few weeks, John introduced me to, actually, I think I already met him, but John kind of made the intro to a guy named Cameron Evans, who's now one of my closest friends, who was running Redline Oil at the time. Redline Oil signed up as our second account, and boom, by the time we went into Christmas, I had 2 accounts. We had positive cash flow.
Yeah. And are they doing what you advise them to do, or are they following your little scheme of your white paper?
They were, and so that was what was cool. Is from the day I started with both those accounts, we were basically, and basically the business model of Kahn Media in 2008 and in 2018 hasn't really changed. We've had to scale and grow, and we've added more services, but the core model is that we are essentially a marketing department for a brand without the overhead of an in-house marketing department.
Okay.
So rather than having to hire 5 or 6 people and pay for salary and payroll tax and benefits and real estate and computers and all that, it's a lot less expensive just to bring us in. So does that include PR? Absolutely. Does it include, in this case in 2018, is there SEM and SMM and remarketing and e-com? Yeah. Do we do data work? We sure do. Did we do that in 2008? No. But, so the kind of the tactics have had to evolve over the years, but the core model of we provide all the marketing services a company needs without the expense of having to do it all in-house, that has not changed. So originally, that first year, out of the spare bedroom of the house, I was doing everything.
Yeah.
So I had those 2 accounts. I think our third account was Spectre Performance, which is now owned by K&N, but at the time was a standalone thing owned by Amir Rosenbaum, and they were doing like cold air intakes and air filters and a lot of chrome accessories and stuff. And so that first year, I was writing all the press releases. I was pitching all the press releases. I was going to every event. I was doing all the ad design and graphic design in Photoshop and InDesign myself. I was doing all the video editing myself. I was shooting all the video myself. I was doing all the social myself. And it was literally just me. And so that first year, especially by like spring when I'd gotten Spectre and I'm now running like 3 accounts, I was working on average like 17, 18 hours a day.
Yeah. Oh, yikes. Yeah.
And like 7 days a week. Like I didn't take a day off. I didn't take a minute off. I mean, it was, and the only reason that worked in my personal life is my wife was working her regular full-time job.
And going to MBA.
And getting her MBA.
Yeah.
So she was doing the same thing. So our marriage wasn't so great that 1 year because
you never saw each other, so it couldn't be that bad.
Yeah. Well, we weren't fighting, but we just weren't seeing each other.
Yeah.
It was like, because she's off in the living room studying, and I'm in the home office
like editing,
writing press releases
and
editing videos, and so we pretty much were like 2 ships passing in the night. And it's funny because there was a tremendous amount of sacrifice that went into that first year.
Yeah.
But I didn't really notice. Like I wasn't like, oh God, I'm so tired and this is so exhausting, because for the first time in my entire life, I was completely in control of my own destiny. And I had this realization a month or 2 in that, wow, there's this directly proportional thing where the harder I work, the more money I make. And the less I work, the less money I make.
Yeah, direct correlation when you own your own business.
Yeah. And it was this real, and it's funny because, my grandfather was an entrepreneur, my father was an entrepreneur, and my dad owns an HVAC, an air conditioning business. And I remember as a kid, on the years when things were really good, how up he was, because that's a very that's a business that's really dependent on season. It's very seasonal, and in the middle of summer, air conditioning business is cranking. If it's a kind of a tepid fall, the phone doesn't ring for months at a time. Yeah. And I remember, in 86, we had this and I was a little kid, I was 7, but I remember in 86. He had a really good year, and he went to the Chevy dealer, and he came home in a brand new C4 Corvette convertible pace car.
Nice.
And it was bright red, and I think that was the first year of the convertible on the C4. And I was like out of my mind. Like as like a 7-year-old, I'm like, this is the coolest thing that's ever happened to us in our entire lives. And then I remember a year or 2 later, he had a really rough year, and he had to sell everything.
Oh gosh, yeah.
He had to sell that car. He sold my mom's car. Like they were sharing this Chevy pickup truck. And I remember this seared into my brain, this vision of my dad at the kitchen table, head in hands, when he didn't know anyone was looking. I think it was like towards the end of the night, and he didn't know anyone was around. And I could see as a kid, he doesn't know what he's going to do. Like he's up against a wall. And I vowed to myself then, I will never own my own business. I will work for other people and collect a paycheck. And so it was very surreal to suddenly be in that exact position. And that's when I kind of realized, like, I have to design a business model so that I'm never in that spot. I don't ever want to have to kind of be month to month, hand to mouth, trying to figure out how am I going to pay the mortgage next month. And that realization was what made me finally realize, oh, I need to scale. I can only do so much. And if I got sick, if I broke my leg, if something happened, the revenue stops. And that's when I realized, like, okay, I need to hire an employee. And it would be weird to hire an employee and have them work out of my spare bedroom. I've got to get an office. And if I'm getting an office, I'm going to have overhead, and I'm going to have to hire an employee, and that employee is probably going to want some sort of health care. And
it snowballs real fast. That is from 0 to 1. That's the huge shift. Like 5 to 20 is like not nearly as bad as that 0 to 1 guy.
That is the absolute truth. And so I made that jump. Interestingly, I found the cheapest office space I could rent, and in this little office park in Reseda, California, which is not a great area. It was a clean office park, so that's all I cared about, and the rent was dirt cheap. And now at this point, we're like end of 2009, so we're in just the pit of the recession, which was great for me because all these companies,
workers.
Well, there's talent out there, and also you have all these sort of small and mid-sized companies in the aftermarket that they still need to stay in business, but they don't have budget to go out and buy magazine ads at $3,000, $4,000 a pop. And so they're trying to find new, more cost-effective ways to market. And here
it's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah. And so to me, that was all opportunity, because I could come along and say, hey guys, there's a lot of other ways to market to a consumer rather than just buying ads in Hot Rod. And sure, we should still keep doing that, but there's a lot of other stuff we can do. And social media, by the way, is free. And, it's all it takes is labor. And there's all these other things we can do. So it really, that recession was such a tremendous boost to our business.
I think you're the first guest we've had that said that.
Well, service-based business, it helped us a lot.
Because you're in the business of, doing things more efficiently. So, I mean, that's where it would come into play.
Absolutely. So it was helpful. And I found out years later, I did not know it at the time, or I probably wouldn't have leased it. But I just found this random little office, and it was cheap. It was like 44 cents a square foot or something. So it was really inexpensive, and it fit my needs, and it was 10 minutes from my house. So I leased this little office, and I made my first hire. And the funny thing is, I found out years later, that office was the very first location for Al Jazeera America.
Huh. Yeah.
And like just a weird little factoid. I'm like, okay, well, that's weird. I don't watch that channel, but it seems like they're doing okay. So whatever. So my first employee, she started with us. She then, after she worked for us for about 3 years and went on to work at Hot Rod and has become kind of a personality. But my second employee, very quickly after that, within a few months of getting the office, was an intern who was an intern that had been an intern at the last place I worked, and eventually his internship ended and they didn't offer him a full-time job. And he kind of called me up hat in hand and said, hey, look, I really like this business. I love cars. Would you hire me as an intern and you don't have to pay me?
Oh,
and I said, yeah,
well, yeah,
sure.
You want to be another intern? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I said, okay, I can't afford to pay more than one employee, so I can't pay you, but if you want to come in and work, we can figure something out. And he did. And he started, he started off just doing kind of grunt work and then worked his way up, and then we started paying him, and then we made him an account coordinator. And the funny thing is, 9 years later, Corey Burns is our VP of accounts. He's still with the company. He's the number 2 guy in the company.
Awesome.
So he has been with me pretty much the whole ride and is a really, really well-respected and talented PR guy. So he's been with us the whole time. A year or two later, we hired a graphic designer pretty early on, and we went through a couple designers in the first year or two trying to find the right fit. And then we hired a really good creative guy who was doing a good job for us, and he kind of hit us up and said, hey, my brother is an instructor at a local college in video and art. but he's off during the summers and he needs a job. Would you hire him as kind of a pickup part-time shooter just to do, freelance work?
Mhm.
We said, sure. So we brought him in, he did good work, and we hired him for some project stuff. And it was literally just like summer project work. And then when the summer was over, I liked the guy so much, I really didn't want him to leave. And so we tried to find a way to make him stay, which he did. And that was like 7.5, 8 years ago. And so that's Franco, and he's our VP of creative. So he's still with us too.
So it sounds like you're higher. I mean, there's been some that have come and gone, but it sounds like a lot of your first people are still there. So you've obviously built something fun and cool and interesting.
Yeah, and that's kind of, agency life is interesting. So, we have had some turnover for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of the fact that, some of our early hires, Alana Shear was our very first employee ever. She ended up going on staff at Hot Rod for like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, and is now a really well-respected freelancer. Laura Conrad, who is, I think, our first account coordinator hire. She's now the head of US PR for McLaren. So some of the people that have left and ended up going on to do really big things, and we were their first job.
Yeah.
So I feel kind of good about that,
Yeah.
and I understand that. I'm never going to begrudge somebody for moving on and trying to better their thing in life. But yeah, a lot of our early people are still with us. And
so, how many people are there now? Like, just fast forward to today, how many?
So today we're in a 7,000 square foot building. We've got 22 people, and we are out of desks.
Wow.
So we literally don't have any more room to put. We've had to remodel the building twice every time, because originally it was 50-50 office space and warehouse space, and we turned the warehouse into a studio. And then when SEMA remodeled the SEMA garage, because originally it had this huge Randy Lorenzen designed photo studio with a big automotive cove in it.
Yep.
And then that thing wasn't being taken advantage of by the membership as much as it probably could have been. I think probably because it's in Diamond Bar.
Yeah.
So that studio sat empty a lot. And at the same time, SEMA's emissions testing program is just wildly successful. Where, as a SEMA member, you can pay SEMA a very nominal fee to essentially do all the emissions compliance certification of your product. So that has been super successful. The studio was not so successful, so they decided to expand the emissions lab into what the studio was, and they decided to sell it. So they put all that gear on eBay. So we bought all that stuff.
Swooped it all up, huh?
Exactly. And we built out this photo studio. So originally we were 50-50, and then we needed to push in there and we needed to add more desks. So we did a remodel and added more office space, and then we had to do it again. So now it's about 75-25, and there's a small studio. It's more office space.
And are you still in the LA area?
So that's kind of a funny story. Our first office after I started the business was in Reseda, in the North LA area. And then I ended up moving personally out to Ventura County, so further north, and it's a little quieter, a little more mellow, better schools, that kind of thing, just for my family as we started having kids. And then eventually I got tired of driving on the road. I was commuting about an hour each way, so about 2 hours a day. And I had little kids at the time. They were babies. And I felt like I was pretty much missing like my kids growing up. And I thought, gosh, I really want to move the office closer to the house and also see if I could find, more space. And we hired a realtor, and commercial realtors, it was not a great experience. We didn't find what we wanted. And my wife went on Craigslist, which is not normally where you would find like an office space. And she finds this building. And she said, oh, this could be perfect for you. It's 50-50 office and warehouse, blah, blah, blah. It's literally 100 feet from the Auto Media office that I started PR in.
Oh, geez. It's come full circle, huh?
By total coincidence. And so we grabbed the building, and we're still here. And it's funny. We just, that wasn't intentional, but we're right back where we started.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's kind of cool to come all the way back around, and then you're in the same spot.
Exactly.
So do you think that, just being in California, it just seems like the obvious answer is yes, but do you think things would have gone differently had you been in a different location? It seems like these opportunities came one after the other being there. If you had been in New York or Atlanta or here in Dallas or something, do you think you would have been able to grow the business as you did? And then the second part of that is, have there been any like downfall or like downside of being in that area, whether it be like pricing or competition or something like that?
It's funny. Those are really good questions. I think, well, to answer the first question, I think starting from the very beginning when I was like a teenager, yeah, I think I often ask myself, like, is this luck? Is this talent? Is this skill? What is this? And I think it's kind of a blend of all those things that have allowed us to grow the way we've grown. The first like 3 or 4 years I was in business, I was in constant petrified fear that like a piano would fall out of the sky and the whole thing would just sort of come apart.
Okay.
Yeah. And like I would knock on every piece of wood I could find. Literally, I was literally doing that all the time because I was just terrified. Like, oh my God, we signed another account and things are growing, and this is just like, how is this going to keep? What if something bad happens? And it took me a long time to get comfortable with the fact that, hey, like we're earning this. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to lose accounts. Things are not always perfect, but this is kind of rooted in an equation that starts with hard work and some degree of skill. But none of this would have happened if I was born in Poughkeepsie, because I having a neighbor across the street from my parents that happened to be in the magazine business, that was totally just like chance or fate or whatever. Having the ability at 16 to drive to downtown LA and have lunch with the guys from Car Craft, that was a pivotal moment for me. That wouldn't have happened if I didn't live in SoCal. Having one of the biggest speed shops in the country 10 minutes from my parents' house when I was a teenager for first job. So I think absolutely being in SoCal helped on the front side of the thing. Now, I spend a lot of time in the air. I travel a lot. Only about 25% of our clients are in this area. The rest are all over the country. We have clients in Atlanta. We have clients in Chicago. We have clients in Alabama, on the East Coast, in Dallas. So these days, we could be anywhere theoretically, and it would still work. But I think from the genesis of the whole thing, being in SoCal definitely helped. Yeah, absolutely. On the challenge side of it, there are certainly challenges, and I don't want to kind of parrot what every California businessman sounds like when you ask them, what's it like doing business in California? But, California is not a super business-friendly state. So the taxes are really high. The cost of living is really high. That is certainly something we struggle with. And honestly, from a recruiting standpoint, I take a lot of pride in really only hiring people that are A, really good at their jobs, and B, as much as possible, are also enthusiasts.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to take someone who has, who drives a Prius and has zero interest in cars. It's really hard to make them a good marketer or publicist in the automotive aftermarket if they view cars the same way they view a refrigerator.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we try to hire car people and train them to do the job rather than hiring PR people, because you can't really train them to be a car person.
Yeah.
But with that said, it's very challenging, because when the median price of a home out here is $500,000,
yeah,
it's tough.
You got to pay a lot of money.
Yeah, and you've salaries are not only high, but getting people, if you need to get someone out here to relocate, if you find the perfect employee and they've got all the right stuff on their resume and they're super engaged and they're a car person and they're a marketer and they've got the right degree and they've got the right background and everything's awesome, but they live in Kansas, getting them to relocate to Southern California, that's a tough ask.
Yep.
Because suddenly their cost of living is going to double or triple. And even if you're paying them a little bit more, they see that, and we've tried it. I mean, I say that from experience.
Yeah.
We have relocated people several times, and it has been a challenging prospect, because they get here and they realize that, oh man, that salary that I thought was so great, I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment and I'm struggling a little bit.
Yeah, they had a house in the burbs with a yard, and now they're in a city of the apartment. I mean, would you? Sorry to kind of shift it here, but like, was there ever be a point of like opening up a second location, like a satellite office or something in Atlanta? I mean, I throw out Atlanta because that's a pretty big automotive place, or here like Dallas or somewhere.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think about it a lot, and I'll be totally honest and tell you that, we've had explosive growth over the last couple of years. So we've grown top line revenue like 30-40% every year for the last 3 years. Inc. magazine just put us on the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing companies in America list. And the hardest thing I've had to do since starting this company, to me, doing PR is pretty straightforward. That's not that hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard work.
Yeah.
I'm definitely
But
working
you're good
hard.
at
But
it and you know what to do.
yeah, I know what to do. It's kind of like that Malcolm Gladwell book. You do something 10,000 times and it becomes sort of
Yeah.
second nature. Coming up with a marketing plan for someone is not that big a deal. Scaling is hard.
Yeah.
And it has been really hard. And it's figuring out how to grow, figuring out how to manage, how to make sure that every client has, and I'm not like some egomaniac that feels like I'm the only one who knows how to do something right. But at the same time, when I'm the one that signs them, they want me involved at some level on every account. So figuring out how to manage my own time, how to structure an org chart so that, everybody has the kind of level of support that they need. Both supervisors getting support from lower level staff, the lower level staff is getting the training they need to do their job correctly, the clients feel like they're getting the right level of attention, but also making sure we're not over servicing accounts so that we're not losing money. That the scaling part has been very challenging, and I feel like we're doing a pretty good job, but there's definitely been some teething pain there, and we're figuring it out. And I've got a good team behind me that does it, but I definitely have thought about originally. Honestly, it's kind of funny because a few years ago, if you had asked me that question, I would have said, yeah, I want to have an office in New York, because to have kind of LA and New York, you've got those nice bookends. We are slowly kind of moving into the luxury lifestyle space as well as the automotive space. And there is a lot of that kind of, those companies are based in New York. Also, there's a lot of media, because keeping in mind that a huge amount of our time is spent talking to the media, and New York is certainly number one and LA is number two. So for a long time, I thought about how a second office in New York would be the place. I have since kind of changed my mind a little bit, because we have a fair amount of clients in and around the greater Atlanta area. That is a growing city. There's a lot of young talent there. The cost of living is still it's high, but it's less than it is in LA.
They've got space to grow. So
yeah. So I've thought about that. The thing that has kept me from doing it is, as we've scaled and as we've kind of struggled with some of these scale challenges, we have had workers remote several times. So over the past few years, we've tried a couple of experiments where, we had an employee who, for personal reasons, wanted to move to Chicago, and we said, okay, great, you can work remote. We'll set you up with a remote work, like at a WeWork, that kind of thing, and that way you can keep doing your thing out there. We had an employee who moved to Vegas for personal reasons, wanted to keep her job but just wanted to work remote. We've tried it. It doesn't historically work all that well, because if it takes a really specific personality type to come in every day, sit down, and grind it out at the same level, with the same level of quality and with the same amount of passion that they would when they're in a team environment, working here surrounded by other people, and you've got that kind of creative energy of a bunch of people and the interplay of different ideas and people helping each other with projects, and that has not worked out real well. So I guess my answer is would I consider doing that? Absolutely. If I could find the right person to be a leader to kind of run that shop the way I would run it.
Yeah, you need to replace yourself. You copy yourself there.
Yeah, it's funny. I was invited to a dinner in January, where it was kind of interesting, because I was invited to this dinner, and I was definitely sort of like of the mindset at this dinner to just kind of keep my mouth shut and listen, because it was all these like titans of the media industry.
Yeah.
And there was a guy who had run a giant media company. There's another guy who had just retired. There's another guy who was a CEO of a huge advertising agency, and another guy who was high up executive. And so I was like the young guy in the room, so I sat there and just kind of listened, and then finally they all kind of like turned their laser focus on me, which at first kind of freaked me out a little bit, and started asking all these questions about my business. And the guy who ran this big ad agency said, hey, I've watched other PR agencies over the years. He said, hey, you guys seem like you have all this explosive growth, and congratulations and all that. What's next? What's your scale plan? And so I didn't have a lot to say there, and I said, look, what are you getting at? And he said, well, I've seen with other agencies, they can only grow to a certain point, and then they hit kind of this wall, because the founder, it's his vision or her vision that kind of carries everything across, the finish line. And you only have so many hours in the day. So I've seen, and this is what this guy told me. He said, I've seen a lot of agencies grow to a certain point and then they hit a wall and they can't grow any further past that because that one person only has so many, hours in the day that they can devote to the business. He says, so you need to clone you and make more people. Not that you're so great or you're so smart, but that you have the vision and you have the ability to execute that vision. And if you can train other people to think the way you think,
make the same decisions in the same situation kind of deal.
Exactly. He said, that's how you scale.
Yeah.
And at the time I walked out of there, and I'm sure you've had those kinds of conversations where you walk away and you realize like something resonated and you go, wow, that's one of those moments in my life where that was truth. Like someone was speaking truth to me and I need to pay attention.
Yeah.
And so I kind of went home and started thinking about that. And that's honestly, that wasn't that long ago. That was a few months ago. And I'm still thinking about it because I realized that, that's the next step.
Yeah. And large companies do that. They groom, a Fortune 500 company is going to groom the next CEO. They mirror them. They teach them all their way. I mean, that's like, but you don't see it in a smaller company. You see it in companies of hundreds of people, not 20 people kind of deal. But yeah, having to clone yourself is what's really needed to really expand. Wanted to know, kind of on this like struggle hardship deal, is there like a specific worst experience that you've had in business that you can think of? And, what did you do to overcome that issue?
I've certainly had a lot of struggles, and I think probably most of them are normal for startups and that kind of thing. I mean, the first year, I definitely, had a lot of stress and how do I make this whole thing work and all that. And our biggest struggle, and I wish I could tell you, is like, oh, we lost this account and then we went in at the last minute, we saved the day and all that stuff. It's not anything that kind of sexy or interesting. What it really was, is it was really the financial side of things. I was a journalism major. I am not by nature a numbers guy. And so my basic business mentality when I started the business was, hey, bill more than you spend. End of business plan. Like as long as more money comes in than we're spending, we're doing okay.
Okay, yeah.
And like
that was the second semester of a MBA program.
Right. That was the one I did. And so I had no idea how to look at I didn't know what a P&L was.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I didn't even, honestly, I was literally, I used QuickBooks as a method for generating invoices.
Yep.
And that was it. And so that first year, and I didn't understand the value of having good advisors. So I went to like my dad's accountant that he didn't love, but was okay, and said, hey, I'm starting this business. Do I need to like get a corporation or something? How does that work? He's like, no, don't do that. That's a giant waste of money. That costs like $1,200. Instead, you should just, do a DBA and do it under your social security number.
Oh,
I said,
Jesus.
oh, okay, that sounds like a great plan. I can save $1,200. And that's what I start doing. So I do a DBA. I file the paperwork for $100, whatever it costs, and I start sending out invoices, and I'm billing all this, stuff, and I'm cranking along. And a year later, there's no money left.
Yeah.
In the business because I'm reinvesting and by the way, I'm not like putting that money in my personal savings account and using it to go buy groceries. I'm reinvesting literally the first like 2 years we were in business. My wife paid for all of our living expenses. Every penny that the business earned went back in the business. It went back into hiring a designer to fix our crappy website that I built to build a new website. It went into infrastructure. It went into buying our first server. It went into freelance labor. It went, once we got an employee, it was going straight to the employee and into her healthcare. And it went into rent for the office when we got an office. And all of a sudden it becomes tax time. And all the IRS sees is our gross billings were X. Yeah. And we paid $0 in taxes for that first year. Whoa. And it's all under my social security number. So, hey, guys, you owe us like 44% of
the margins. Yeah.
And so year 2, we're in business, and I've got this tax bill that's like a deep 5-figure tax bill. And I went like sideways. I had no idea what was going on. And honestly, it took me a couple years to dig out from underneath that. And then I hired an accountant, and I went and filed incorporation papers and became
you did it right. You spent the $1,000 and did it right.
Yeah, and I did it right, but I still didn't really have the right people helping me. and teaching me what to do. So still, I mean, really the first like 6 years we were in business, even once I incorporated and set up like corporate bank accounts and did it all the right way and started doing taxes quarterly and doing all the stuff the normal business owner does that I didn't know because nobody ever told me and I was too stupid to ask.
Yeah.
Even once we got all that dialed in to the point where, okay, now we're a functioning, healthy business, I still didn't have the right tools to run things the way a successful business runs.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until about the time that we moved offices and came out here, I went out and only because we moved, I thought, oh, I need a new bookkeeper. I need a new accountant. I'm not going to drive back and forth an hour into the city every day or every week to deal with this. And all of a sudden I hired different people that came recommended just from like friends. And suddenly they're telling me, hey, you know, if you look at your P&L, you're spending too much money here and you're not investing enough there. And hey, for tax purposes, you should do this. And all of this, and I had no idea that kind of intelligence even existed. And all of a sudden I started surrounding myself with people that were smarter than me and had different skill sets than I did. And suddenly every week I get, you know, an aging report and I can see who owes us money. I never did that before.
Yeah.
I just like, oh, that guy didn't pay.
I just remember it. Yeah.
I guess.
I got to say, like, that resonates so well with everybody. You know, like that was one of the big reasons we really liked this podcast originally when Reed was doing it, was because you hear the stories and it's like, I mean, I have visited hundreds of shops and consulted with dozens and dozens of them. And it's the same thing over and over again. You know, you just, you think you know how to start a business and, you know, you do it from your garage and you grow and then you do it wrong and then it catches up to you. And so like, we even just started doing a seminar, like a 4-hour seminar on how to start a performance shop. And like one of the earliest things is like find an accountant and get a business lawyer. Like it doesn't matter how much it costs, because if you don't do it, you're going to, just like you said, you're going to have a multi-thousands of dollar tax bill that you have to pay, or they're going to come like take your house if you don't do it right. And it's amazing that like, I mean, just nobody talks about it. It's not fun. It's not flashy. It's not fast. So yeah, hearing that, you know, it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. If you don't go about it right, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that was a hard lesson to learn. But,
yeah.
But once I learned it, I can sleep at night. I
Yeah.
mean, I went for a couple of years not being able to sleep at night because I didn't even know, like, how much money am I owed and how much do I owe the IRS and what am I going to do and how's this all going to work? And once we got it all straightened out and I actually had like proactive intelligence that I could use to steer the ship, man, things got a whole lot easier.
Yeah. Yep. So moving on to like the client base. So this is a question that, you know, I've never worked with a manufacturing company or anything like that. So are you, so it sounded like in the beginning you were going after people to get their business and then kind of word of mouth spread. What is the steps that are needed to hire like your company? You know, you can be very specific about it, of like, you know, what are they looking for? What do you provide? You know, maybe give us a little bit of an idea of like what it costs, you know, if there's somebody out there that's looking for a PR firm. Because from like a shop standpoint, you know, it's like I'm going to post pictures on Facebook and I'm going to go to events. But from a manufacturer standpoint, you're kind of trying to get to that consumer level. So can you kind of explain, you know, the offering that you have and, you know, kind of what you guys do for these companies, for these clients of yours?
Yeah, absolutely. So we offer kind of a menu of different things. Basically, what we tell people is we help them connect with consumers. And that can take a lot of different paths. So we have some accounts where we are basically marketing soup to nuts. We handle all their PR, media relations, social media marketing, digital marketing, anything that requires, you know, anything in the funnel-based system to funnel consumers into e-commerce, everything, you know, product photography, catalog creation, videography, trade show booth design.
So it's
and then
like
we have,
so like that company, like they manufacture the product and that's it. And you
Yeah,
guys
well,
do
I mean-
well from the advertising side, like
Yeah, from the marketing side.
Okay.
And a lot of times, but then we also have clients where some use us purely for straight PR and media relations.
Okay.
Some use us purely for event promotion. Some use us just for digital or for social. So it kind of depends. And you're right. Early on in the business, I was going out and pounding pavement and knocking on doors and making calls and saying, hey, this is what we do. And I had this little brochure and I'd hand it to them and this is what we can do for you and that kind of thing. We do still pursue some business like that. It's much more word of mouth now.
Okay,
So, a lot of times we get a call and, from a company and they've heard about us from someone or through SEMA or whatever. And they're looking either for help with a specific project or in many cases, they know they just need more. The best results we have for clients is when there's a strong in-house marketing person.
Okay.
And whether they're a CMO or a marketing manager or even
and
a
that's
sales
chief
manager.
marketing officer.
Yeah, that's CMO, that's director of marketing.
Okay.
That's even sometimes like a head of sales and marketing, where they know what they need to do. They understand their company, they understand their product, and they understand their consumer. They just don't have the horsepower to get it all done.
Mm-hmm.
Because they think the difference from 2018 to the old days is in the old days, especially if you're like in the automotive aftermarket space and you make a product, you manufacture something, or even in the case of if you're a shop and you're building cars, whether you're building race cars or hot rods or whatever.
Yeah, because like Ring Brothers, I was looking at your website. Like Ring Brothers is one of your clients, and like they manufacture products, but they also build cars.
Exactly. And we've been with the Rings a long time. They've been a client for like 7 years. Classic Recreations that builds all the continuation cars for Shelby. They've been a client since the beginning for like 10 years. So whether they're builders or they're manufacturers, companies like Magnaflow or, Hellwig Products or whatever, in many of those cases, in the old days, Hellwig Suspension as an example, they've been around for 72 years.
Oh my gosh.
So in the old days, they didn't really need a marketing manager. You would have one person who was like the point person who would buy a bunch of ads in magazines, and that's marketing.
Yeah, they'd have a photo shoot, do some copy, and send it out, and that's it.
Yeah, we got a little catalog, and we buy some ads, and we go to the SEMA show or whatever, and that's it.
Okay.
So you didn't need to have all this manpower. You didn't need to have all this traction. And now, you've got to have a presence on Instagram. You got to have a presence on Facebook. You probably are going to have different content on those. You need videos on YouTube, but also on all your product landing pages, showing how your product's installed, showing how, showing testimonials, people using your product. Well, someone's got to produce all that content. Someone's got to work with your WDs to make sure they're getting new product releases. You've got to put together email marketing drip campaigns, all those different things. And then there's the PR and going to events, and all that stuff requires manpower, and they're all different skill sets. It's pretty hard to find someone who's a really talented video shooter, video editor, graphic designer, copywriter, print production person who also knows how to, put together, SMM and remarketing ads.
Yeah.
I haven't met that person yet. If I did, I would hire
them if you did, though.
And then clone them, right? But that person doesn't exist. That's like 5 people.
Yeah.
And it's not usually cost effective,
to do
especially
that in-house. Yeah.
Do that. So a lot of times what'll happen is we'll get a call and someone will say, hey, here's all the things I need. And then what we do is we'll come up with a pricing strategy where we have a flat hourly rate that applies to all the different departments in the business. And we'll say, okay, we think to do all the 5 or 6 things on your punch list you need to get done, it's going to take, 50 hours a month or 60 hours a month or whatever it is. And then we just put together, here's what our fee is going to be. Here's what all the deliverables are going to be for that fee. And you're going to get a report every month that details every single thing we did for the money. We overwork our retainers like crazy. It's not good business, but it is good for long-term relationships. Yeah. And then, we kind of grow together. And our best relationships are the ones like Ring Brothers where, we grow together. And as we come up with new ideas, and so perfect example. When we started with Ring Brothers 6 or 7 years ago, we helped them with a lot of their branding. We did all their PR, and we did all their video, and we launched all their social channels. And so, we launched their Facebook page, we launched their Instagram account, we do all that stuff. We come to SEMA, we orchestrate all their vehicle unveils, we help them promote all their new billet products. Well, they sell direct as well as through distribution. because they are a car builder, and that's what everybody knows them for, is that they built these amazing, super high-end muscle car builds. But the bread and butter of their business is actually the billet parts business. So, hood hinges, door strikers,
handles,
door handles, and all that stuff. So they sell through distribution through Summit and JEGS and things like that, but they also sell direct through their website and over the phone and through a catalog. Well, years ago, we kind of were sitting around going, boy, and I'll be totally honest, the digital marketing thing didn't come out of, hey, we think this is a great new business model we're going to get into. It came from, hey, we need to help our client figure out how to do this so that we can help them drive more direct sales, because there's more margin in direct sales than through, WD sales and multi-step. And we tried finding an outlet to use for that. And all these sort of kind of turnkey digital marketing companies that do SMM and SEM, search engine marketing, paid social marketing, remarketing, none of them understood the car thing. So they were screwing up the accounts where they'd take a picture of a, GTO and say it's a Mustang, and they didn't know the difference. And so we finally said, okay, you know what, we're just going to have to figure this out and do it for them, because we can't find someone that can do it right. And so we asked Rings as a partner and said, hey, can you allow us to do this? And we're not going to charge you for the first couple months while we do a bunch of A/B testing and try and figure out how to do it the right way.
Cool.
And they said, yeah, experiment with us. I mean, don't do anything that'll hurt our business, but sure, figure it out. And so they gave us, we basically went to school on their dime.
Okay.
And they allowed us to experiment with how does this work and how do the algorithms work and what kind of targeting works better than others. And we figured it out. And then once we figured it out, we said, okay, guys, we figured it out. Here's how much budget you need to give us, and here's what we think the results are going to be. And they worked, and they started making more money. And so then we were able to scale that thing up. And then we were able to take all the lessons we learned on that little account and apply it to some of our bigger accounts, some of our bigger manufacturing companies. And then we were able to kind of grow that side of our business. Same
cool.
thing with, the Peterson Automotive Museum is a great client. The people that run it are fabulous people. And when we started working with them, they did no outbound marketing at all. They would occasionally have a PR story in a car magazine. They had basically no social presence. They had no digital presence. And we have grown together where, we've done a lot of pretty innovative stuff with them. And in exchange, they've also pushed us to do stuff that we wouldn't normally do. We're in the middle of producing some content for them for one of their galleries right now that's all augmented reality, 360 panoramic, motorsports video. We didn't know how to do that until they came to us and said, hey, we want you to do this. And we said, okay. And we went out and bought the rigs and figured it out. And it actually worked pretty well. And we were able to refine it. And hey, now we know how to do this. So now we can go to other clients and offer them that. So it's a kind of a cool interchange where, our clients often, will lead the client, but then sometimes the client will come to us and say, hey, there's this other thing I want to do.
Can
you figure it out? And then we'll do it together.
That's cool. That's very cool. And so are you accepting applications all the time for new clients?
Always.
Yeah, we're always open to it.
Always looking for new people, always looking for new accounts. And, unfortunately, we don't always hire every person who applies, and we don't sign every account that comes in the door. But, one thing I do feel very strongly about that, I need to believe in the client and their product.
Yeah.
And there aren't a lot of examples where I've turned away business, but it does happen occasionally where, we were hit up by a company, I don't know, a year or two ago, where at first it sounded sort of interesting. And then as I started to do some research and started to engage with this person that reached out to us, it became pretty clear that even though the front person had an office here in the States and was an American, he was sort of the front guy for a business that was a Chinese company.
It's like a liaison.
That was knocking off. Yeah, and what he was really doing was he was representing a factory in China that was knocking off American speed parts companies.
Oh, that's not good.
So once I figured that out, I was done.
Yeah, you're not going to associate yourself with that.
No. And I, for a lot of reasons. First of all, it wouldn't be good for my career and my business, but also I just feel like morally, I'm friends with, I don't represent Edelbrock. I don't work for them. I never have had them as a client, but I respect the hell out of them as a company, and I respect the heck out of the people that run that business. And I know how much time and energy and effort goes into R&D on their products. Am I going to want to represent a company that's going off and knocking off their stuff? No, absolutely not.
No. So what is like your 1 year plan for the business? Where do you see yourself this time, like next year?
Well, it's funny. I believe very strongly in, we do a lot of SWOT analysis with our management team,
And
and
that's
we set.
strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats.
Yep, exactly. So we do that quarterly. Where we try and figure out, okay, where are we going? Where are we coming from? What are threats and competition? A lot of times, on the threats quarter of that kind of chart, it's not like, our competitors. It's changing technology, or it's changing consumer behavior. So those kind of things, we spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I feel very strongly for about the last 5 years, we set short-term goals, quarterly goals, annual goals, and a 5-year plan. And I have found almost without exception that when we put that down on paper and kind of the senior management team, when we all agree that, okay, this is where we want to be in the next year, we have achieved it every single time. And I think part of it is managing expectations. We're not saying, okay, we're going to do $20 million next year, and then boom, it happens. Like it's
it's not that
like crazy pie in the sky stuff, but we try and set achievable stretch goals where we say, okay, these are the things we want to do. So like when we decided, we saw the explosion of growth in the Jeep truck and off-road market a few years ago.
Yeah.
And we just saw, and at that time we were pretty focused on like street performance and muscle stuff. And we thought, gosh, that thing is just exploding. We've got to get more involved in that side of the business. And we started going after it. And now about a third of our clients are in that space. This past year, we had 2 stretch goals, which we said, okay, one is we had some financial benchmarks that we wanted to hit, because we really felt like, okay, this is the year that we're going to hit certain profitability goals, and we want to get on that Inc. 5000 list. And we pursued that, and we made it, and we did it. So we're really happy about that. And we also kind of said a year ago, hey, we really want to get more involved in the men's lifestyle and luxury lifestyle market, not because we're shifting away from automotive. We're not. We're as strong in automotive as ever. But I feel like diversifying, we've honed a skill set with the automotive thing where we're really good. I mean, let's be honest, there's not a ton of, female customers in the automotive aftermarket.
No.
They're out
statistically there. That's very small.
Yeah, but it's small. So we've gotten pretty good at selling stuff to guys at the end of the day. And so we know how to do it. And so it's kind of those things where, hey, let's diversify and let's see if we can kind of push into another market, just so that, we have a little bit of insulation and we have a little bit of, we're slightly protected, so that if something happened, if, the EPA wakes up tomorrow and outlaws internal combustion engines, look, is that going to happen? No. But I do want to make sure that I still have a job to go to in the next 5 years. So I always think kind of diversification is a positive. So we've started pushing into that space, and we do all the US PR for Rolex. We do, we work with the Quail, which is kind of a very high-end event, hotel-based event company up in Monterey during Monterey Car Week. So we have sort of, we work with a helicopter company now. So we have sort of pushed into that space. So that's all happened in the past year. Our next year goal is really more focused on managing growth, slowing things down a little bit to make sure we deliver the maximum amount of quality for every dollar spent. And honestly, it's focused on changing and pivoting our digital and video strategy, where we've always been sort of towards the front of the pack with our social strategy and our execution of social and video. And the appetite for video content has become so ravenous, with IGTV and even the algorithms on Facebook and Instagram, where, video is so much more rewarded than a photo post, that, we have 3 full-time video shooter editors on staff, and they have a hard time keeping up. So we're actually pivoting our entire video strategy to be much more run and gun, way more same day video. And, before we'd go out and go on this big fancy shoot and have lights and permits and all this stuff, and we're shooting, and 3 weeks later we've got this really bitchin' polished video.
And we still take your cell phone camera out there and do it in 20 minutes.
That's exactly right. So we've developed a much more run and gun strategy. We still have Reds and all the big gear and all that stuff. And there are instances where we still need all that, but we're also changing a lot of how we do video, so that we can show up at an event with 2 or 3 people, get everything shot. It gets edited, uploaded, and posted all same day.
Yeah, very cool.
And it's, you know, it's better for the brand, for the client, but it's also just better on my people. You know, it's a lot
Just
more
get it
streamlined.
over with, yeah.
Yeah, get it done so you can move on to the next thing.
So what about, you know, your 5-year goal? You mentioned that you guys talk about it. Can you share what your 5-year plan is, your big, hairy, audacious goal?
Yeah, my BHAD. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into it, but honestly, it's not anything super secret, and it's not anything super surprising. We've reached a point where, as an employer, I say, okay, you know, 3 years ago we had 10 employees. Today we have 22. So in another 5 years, do I want 60 employees?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, I don't. You know, do I want to take over a 20,000 square foot
The
office?
whole floor of an office, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't want to do that either. It's just, you know, there comes a point where there's some sort of a balance where we can be profitable and my team can make a good living and our clients are happy and we're happy and work-life balance is achieved. And I feel like if you run too far ahead of all that as you scale, that gets harder and harder to accomplish. So, you know, 5 years from now, do I want to continue to work with the best brands in the industry? Absolutely. You know, do I want to push really hard to get even deeper into consumer-facing social and digital outreach? Yeah, absolutely. I would like to do more event-based marketing. I want to stay as focused as we can on working with the best brands in the automotive aftermarket. I'd love to get an OEM account. We've participated in a couple of RFPs with OEMs. We've passed on participating in a couple, and we have participated in a couple, and we do a fair amount of project work for OEMs. I still think most of those companies, they look at us as, you know, a pipsqueak compared to some of these giant agencies that have, you know, 10 offices and 1,000 employees.
Yeah.
So why would we hire the little guy with 22 employees? But that mindset's changing. And I think they're starting to realize too that a small, nimble company can move a lot faster than a very big
much
one.
so.
So I would love to get an account like that. But really for us, the focus is to just continue to kind of winnow down, you know, what we do and how we do it so that we're as effective as possible. We can control our overhead and control costs so that we're not too expensive to work with the small companies, but we have the ability when we need to scale up and work with an OEM. Because the most fun accounts I work on are the ones in the automotive aftermarket with people that I'm friends with, and we get to go out and do fun stuff. You know, when I get to go to, you know, Easter Jeep Safari and I'm hanging out with, you know, my friends who work at MagnaFlow and my friends who work at Hellwig and, you know, pro drivers that we've become friends with. And yeah, we're working and we're actually doing really cool stuff and we're getting great results, but we're also having a good time. I like doing that. That's why I signed up for this thing in the first place. And when you're grinding away on some PR campaign for some giant mega corporation that, you know, doesn't even know who you are, there's probably a lot of money to be made there, but it's not very fun.
It's not very much fun, yeah.
No. And at the end of the day, I think we could all make more money going and sell, you know, marketing toothpaste than we could, you know, marketing
car
performance
stuff
parts.
is way more fun.
Yeah, but that's no fun. So that's kind of part of the goal.
I want to see if you'll offer a little piece of free advice. So for companies out there that, you know, either manufacture products or, you know, have a performance shop, what is something they could do like right now, or maybe that you see coming, you know, that's a good idea for them to do media wise to kind of get their name out there? Is there one like little thing or, you know, one piece of advice you can give them?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a couple of things actually. So I would say, first of all, I mean, the single best thing you can do, and a lot of these shops are already doing it, is have a really great, positive, forward-facing social media presence. You know, so go on Instagram, engage with people. Don't just post, like, here's another shot of a thing that we made. Isn't this cool? And then you never even look at the comments and you move on. Interact with people.
Mm-hmm.
If you start paying attention, you start seeing that the same person keeps liking everything you post, or they've gone back in time and liked every picture you ever uploaded. Don't be passive. You know, reach out to that person and send them a DM and say, hey, thanks for interacting with our page and liking our stuff. And what's your name and what are you into? And there might be a customer there. There might be a journalist there that wants to do a story on you. You never know, but reach out and proactively engage with those people. And then the other thing that I would say is focus on developing your own voice. If you look at some of the bigger channels on social right now, they're not necessarily producing the coolest stuff or making the most slick content, but they have a voice that people relate to and they identify with that channel's kind of brand.
Mm-hmm.
And like a perfect example, like Jesse James. You can love that guy, or you can hate him. Maybe you liked his TV show, maybe you couldn't stand it, maybe you think he's the coolest guy who ever lived, maybe you're a huge Sandra Bullock fan and you think he's a jerk.
Yeah.
Whatever. I don't really care. There's no denying that what he's done on Instagram over the past couple of years is incredibly powerful.
Uh-huh.
He's kind of pivoted away from the motorcycle business and towards his whole firearm thing. He's built a huge demand for that product. Everything he sells goes for premium price and has a waiting list. And he gets pretty, gritty on there, and he says what he thinks, and he gets political.
Yeah.
And honestly, in the old days, that would be like a huge no-no. You would never want to talk about anything political. You would never want to say anything controversial. But, he says what he thinks, and he thinks what he says, and he's pretty honest and genuine about who he is and what he stands for. And even the people who don't agree with him or don't like him are still paying attention, and I think they respect that he's open, honest, and transparent about who he is and what he's trying to do. And to me, we try and take that methodology to every account we work on. We're not necessarily confrontational or political, but we tell every client, and we'll only work with companies that agree with this philosophy, that you have to be open, honest, and transparent with how you communicate about your brand to the consumer. You have to own who you are. If you're making parts in China, you can't pretend like you're making them in, Columbus, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find other things to talk about, and you have to find other things to focus on, but you also have to be honest about it.
Okay.
If you're a two-man operation and you're building Mustangs in the back of your garage, show people that. Don't pretend you're something you're not. Be honest and show people this is why they should work with your shop, because there are only two of you and you are working out of your home garage, and so that all the work you put in is personal. And people will connect with that, and they will relate to it, and they will reward it.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. We get that. I can kind of resonate with that sentiment a little with our software company. People call us, and it's good that often people think we're a lot bigger than we are, but they're like, what do I, if I have a question, what do I do? And I'm like, oh, you just call us. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, either me or my one partner will answer the phone and we'll talk it over,
Exactly.
And so, and people appreciate that, coming from the background that we do. We've been in the industry, and we're still in the industry, and, we've gone through the struggle, and people can relate to that. So there is a lot to be said on, keeping that personal side of it, which, it has its ups and downs, its drawbacks, but it's kind of the way things are now, is that you're kind of expected to be more personal side, not removed from the company.
Right. Exactly.
Well, very cool, man. That's a great little piece of advice for all the people looking out there to improve their, their social media presence, for sure. So, I've got, this is kind of just the last little question here. It's kind of a fun little one that we always ask is, what is your daily driver vehicle? Like, that's not a race car or, what do you take for your little commute to work each day?
Good question. So my daily is a 2018 Super Duty diesel FX4 with a 4.5-inch Icon lift.
Okay.
And it's got Hellwig sway bars. It's got 37-inch Nitto ridge grapplers, MagnaFlow exhaust, bushwhacker fenders, and amp steps.
And so that's your city crawler, huh? That's your city vehicle.
Okay, so
how do you justify that in California?
That is my daily driver, and it is sort of ridiculous. I love it. It's my favorite truck I've ever owned. And on the weekends, we do a lot of camping, and we tow a 29-foot travel trailer.
Nice.
So the big Super Duty is a great tow vehicle, and I love driving it. But we're out in the suburbs, so driving that thing back and forth to work is easy. When I have to go to the city, we have a leased company car that I use and other people on staff use, and that's just a little Audi A5.
Okay, yeah, a little more nimble. Yeah,
I had a meeting at the Peterson yesterday down in like the middle of the heart of LA, and parking a 4.5-inch.
You got to have 2 spots for that one.
It's not fun. It's a pretty stressful deal. So So we have a little Audi for driving around town, and then I just sold my project car like a month ago on Bring a Trailer. So I'm looking for the next thing.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I had interviewed I think another one of your clients, the Jay Leno Garage Car Vehicle Care guys.
Yep.
And he got a Chevy Volt, because it was like, and it was funny because everybody at Jay Leno's garage has one, like all of his employees, because he's like, yeah, Jay lets us charge it there, and you get to go in the HOV lane, and you never buy gas. And I was like, well, that totally makes sense, but then they have their Project Fun race car kind of stuff as well. So
and that's exactly, like, so funny, because when I decided I needed like something to drive into the city and for the staff to drive too, because of the Leno guys, I was seriously thinking about buying a Volt. And I'm like, you know what? And, you fill it up once every 2 months or something. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, I'm on the SEMA board of directors. I run a PR company. They handle some of the biggest performance parts companies in the country. I can't drive around.
I can't do it.
I can't do it. I got to get something with internal combustion engine.
Oh, that's great. And yes, we didn't discuss it, but congratulations on the board nomination.
Thank you.
That's pretty awesome.
I appreciate it. Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah, so, just to close out here, if people are, interested in finding more about your company or contacting you guys to do some work, where can they go online to find more information?
Just KAHN, KahnMedia.com.
Thanks a lot, Dan. We really appreciate you taking some time to talk with me today, and you got a very cool story, and, you've got some super cool clients, and I wish you the best of luck, moving forward and growing with your plans, and going to be fun to see what you guys can come up with.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate all the support.
Thanks for listening to Do It for a Living. You can find out more about this guest, this show, and even details about what we just talked about at our website. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/doitforaliving and tell us who you want to hear from. And most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Click subscribe. Do it now. Seriously. I'll wait while you grab your phone. Open up the podcast app. Tap the subscribe button. When you subscribe, you help us gain momentum and attract more high-level